From Domino's Pizza's improbable turnaround to Arizona's bold fight to keep prices low, and even a canned water company shaking up the beverage industry, I'm diving into 5 brands that are redefining what it means to succeed. This is 1 hour of how these companies are transforming the business world as we know it. The year is 2009. The iPhone's in its infancy, the US economy is deep into a recession, and Domino's Pizza is about to take one of the most unorthodox approaches to revitalizing their brand that any publicly traded company has recently done. During this time, Domino's sales were declining fast, much due to negative customer sentiment around their core product, their pizzas. Same-store sales were down 3 years in a row, which is one of the worst possible things for a broad food franchise. The company knew they had to do something about this, but they didn't know how or exactly what route they'd want to take. So in this video, I'll break down a brief history of the largest pizza chain, what they did to completely revitalize their brand, and how they've used several unique approaches to continuously adapt their brand to this day. The first Domino's was actually called Dominick's, and it opened in 1960 in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Brothers Tom and James Monahan buy the first store for $900. However, just 1 year later, James wasn't as into the pizza business as Tom was, so he decided to sell his half of the business to his brother in exchange for a used Volkswagen Beetle. This was the same Beetle that the restaurant was using for deliveries at the time. And that's one of the first things that Domino's introduced that was unique: pizza delivery. Today, food delivery is so common with all of these super accessible apps to choose from. But back then, to quote Tom, delivery at the time was pretty minimal, so I decided to focus on that. And it was the best thing I've done. Nobody thought you could make money on delivery. Most places just delivered to get some volume before they could afford to cut out the delivery. But I thought I could do it. It was a challenge, I just had to figure out how. Being close to local universities in Michigan really helped boost their delivery business, and in 1965, Tom renames the business to Domino's Pizza Incorporated. After being renamed, Tom tried to rapidly expand the brand by franchising new restaurants. He was witnessing what other big brands like McDonald's and KFC were doing and thought, I need to get bigger. The first franchise would open in 1967, another in 68, and by 1969 he went from 12 stores all the way to 44 in just 10 months. Talk about rapid expansion. But Tom would quickly learn that moving fast is not the same as going somewhere, because he would later go on to say, I had all of these employees around, I didn't know what they were doing. I had a computer, I had financed all of these franchises, but they weren't doing any business. It wasn't that they were doing poor business, they weren't doing any business. I had the busiest pizzerias in the world and I had the slowest pizzerias, all in the same chain. Instead of putting stores near universities, we got into residential areas around Detroit, and the stores got lost. I kept selling the franchisees food that they couldn't pay for, and they weren't paying any royalties. Therefore, as a result of all of these failing restaurants, Tom went into a lot of debt and lost 51% of the company to the banks. The banks at the time had no real idea on what to do with these restaurants, and inevitably made them worse because they tried to cut costs significantly, and that severely affected the quality of the ingredients. Now, eventually, Tom was able to gain back the majority interest of the company after he got the restaurants back from the bank, but he still needed to figure out ways to pay off all of the debt. Multiple lawsuits were piling up from franchisees, and Tom was struggling, but little by slowly he got to work and started paying them off. He was living in a house with no furniture, driving old delivery vehicles, he couldn't afford an attorney, so he would defend himself in court. During court, he would try to figure out payment plans, and in about a year, he had paid everyone back. This is when Domino's begins to take off to the races. Same-store sales were rapidly growing, and Tom had figured out a more strategic way to franchise the restaurants. One where he would waive the franchise fee up front, which for anyone who doesn't know, is a hefty upfront cost for the franchisee to get started with the brand. In exchange for waiving the fee, Domino's would make the potential franchisee owner work as a successful manager in one of the restaurants for up to a year. Tom claimed this saved money because he didn't need to hire attorneys to negotiate franchise deals with, and it was the best franchise system in the industry. By 1983, Domino's had over 1,100 restaurants. During the 1980s, Domino's would roll out one of their most popular marketing programs, their 30 minutes or free guarantee. They guaranteed that any pizza you bought would be delivered in 30 minutes or less, and if not, pizza would be free. This was a huge hit among consumers, and in 1989, Domino's was doing extremely well. So well, in fact, that Tom felt like it was finally time to sell the business and move on to serving his life to the Catholic Church. He thought he could quickly find someone to take over the business and prove to a potential buyer that Domino's could run without Tom at the helm. But that didn't happen. Domino's quickly regressed because Pizza Hut started to get into delivery and was eating into Domino's market share. On top of that, Little Caesars were starting to take over as well, and before he knew it, Domino's was $500 million in debt. During the 1990s, Tom would return at the helm and try to turn around the company, but it didn't happen as fast as he thought it would. Over the years, several accidents from delivery drivers would force Domino's to discontinue this 30-minute deal, and in 1993, Domino's was ordered to pay $79 million to a woman who was struck by one of their delivery drivers that ran a red light. Domino's would end up changing the marketing to the total satisfaction guarantee. If for any reason someone was dissatisfied with their Domino's pizza or dining experience, they would remake their pizza or refund their money. And even though the 30 minutes or less guarantee was gone, it had been in effect so long that the marketing itself stuck with the brand inherently. With the brand still struggling though, Tom had to get back to basics, and he likens one of the biggest changes to one that came from within. Tom was a religious man and was reading a book titled Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and there was a chapter in there on pride. To quote Tom, it hit him right between the eyes. It basically said that sometimes when you work harder than other people and set higher goals than other people, you do it for the wrong reasons, so that you have more than others. Tom says he thought those things were virtues. So he took what he called a millionaire's vow of poverty, selling all of his big possessions. He didn't drive luxury cars, he didn't fly first class, he didn't own any planes, and he even sold the Detroit Tigers, which he bought in the 1980s. Tom would then inevitably sell Domino's Pizza in 1999 to Bain Capital. And in 2004, Domino's would go public on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol DPZ. And for the first few years, things were going well. But when the financial crisis struck in 2008, Domino's was already facing some tough backlash. As I said, sales stores were plummeting, and 2 employees had also filmed themselves messing with food as they prepared it that was seemingly for a customer. The overall sentiment around the quality of their pizzas was deteriorating, and fast. Domino's had big problems, and they had to decide what they wanted to do about it. This is my favorite part of this story, and honestly, it's what made me want to cover this topic as a whole. Just think for a second, how many times do you see a brand you know or like make a ton of bad decisions, and therefore taint the brand altogether? Whether it's a restaurant you love, a video game, or even a retail brand. In 99% of the time, the brand will never admit any wrongdoing and will either stay silent and or just double down on the direction that they're already going in, hoping that inevitably things just smooth out. Well, not Domino's, because Domino's took a path that most companies will never. Brutal honesty. They created a whole advertising campaign bashing their pizzas. I mean, they literally said, "Our pizzas suck." And thus began the pizza turnaround. In 2009, Patrick Doyle would become the CEO of Domino's, and he wasn't just going to have the company talk the talk here. Domino's completely set out to revamp their whole product, having chefs working overtime, trying to come up with all new recipes to master this new pizza. New cheeses, new sauce, and of course, a new crust. Domino's knew the future of the business depended on revitalizing their product. So during the initial innings of the ad campaign, Domino's would air commercials of real customers bashing their pizzas. And once Domino's figured out their new pizza recipe, they went back around to each person in that focus group and had them try this new pizza.
Hey!
Adrienne?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sam from Domino's Pizza.
Hi, you ordered pizza?
Hey, did you say these things in a focus group?
Doesn't feel like there's much love in Domino's Pizza.
You said that?
Yeah.
I happen to bring the head chef from Domino's Pizza.
No, you did not. I'm sorry.
Did you say that about our pizza?
Wow, I did.
Don't be sorry. Your comments helped us to improve everything about our pizza. Try it.
Can I?
Please.
Wow.
Some love in there, isn't it?
There's a lot of love in there. This is what I was talking about.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
This is the show don't tell tactic that Domino's utilized in these ads, and it was brilliant, filming the reactions all along the way and turning them into ads for their new pizzas. Now, Domino's admitted their faults, took swift action to figure out a solution to their problem, and then took it full circle by getting validation from the same people that disliked the pizza in the first place. This level of transparency was a huge hit among customers because it helped restore trust in the brand. Now, this may sound very basic in nature, but the truth is, sometimes all you gotta do is keep things simple by doing the next right thing. In 2010, Bain Capital would sell its interest in Domino's Pizza, and in 2011, Patrick Doyle would be named the #1 best CEO by CNBC. But Domino's knew it couldn't just rest on its laurels. The business has constantly been innovating with ways to acquire new customers and retain their already returning ones. They quickly moved to redesign their logo and update all of their stores with what they called the Pizza Theater in 2012. This was an open kitchen concept where people could witness the pizza being made as they walked into into their stores. Now, you may notice today that Domino's stores aren't very large and don't have a ton of tables for sitting down and eating at. That's because the majority of their business is takeout and delivery, but also because Domino's can save a ton of money on real estate by having smaller stores. Another vital adoption was their use of technology. Their app is a huge hit to this day, but Domino's was one of the early pioneers when it came to food apps. As of 2022, their app amounted for 75% of sales. They added something called the pizza tracker within their app, and this shows customers where their pizza is at from the process of creation all the way to delivery. Domino's was also the inventor of the corrugated cardboard pizza box that nearly every pizza place uses today. Their delivery vehicles have been on the cusp of innovation since the brand was born, and Domino's is always looking for new ways to get the pizza delivered to the customer faster without sacrificing any quality. And lastly, of course, Domino's is known for having incredible deals on their pizzas in order to garner more business. The 2 medium pizzas for $6 was a huge hit back in the mid-2000s, and they still offer a form of this deal to this day. If you were to buy 1 share of Domino's pizza stock back in 2011, shortly after the pizza turnaround was in effect, the share would have cost $17, but that same share today would be worth well over $400. So this isn't just a story about pizza. I believe it's a powerful lesson in resilience, innovation, and the commitment to delivering excellence. Domino's journey stands as a beacon for businesses, reminding us that success isn't just found from a singular path, but if you focus on the customer first, the path becomes rather straightforward.
No retailer will ever put liquid death on the shelf in the US.
That's Mike Cesario, founder, CEO of canned water company Liquid Death, which is currently valued at $1.4 billion. And it all started with one big joke.
For years, a bunch of marketing fuckboys have tricked you into thinking that water is just some girly drink for yoga moms. Just look at all the cute brand names and dainty little bottles.
When most people first hear about a beverage company called Liquid Death, they think, wait, that's a real thing? And then they think, oh, that's an alcoholic beverage. But no. This is canned water with an insane touch of marketing. Mike thought, what if you could actually make water cool? And to quote Mike, he said, a brand transcends functional benefits. If your brand is just functional benefits, then you don't have a brand. And I love this quote because it really speaks to how some of the most innovative companies think and operate today. Now, before we get into the crazy marketing strategies that have helped make Liquid Death become so successful, we need to go back some time to understand how this company got started. Prior to starting this company, Mike Cesario worked for a marketing agency in Nashville, Tennessee. They helped create advertising for Netflix, Apple, and several other notable brands. One of the companies was Organic Valley, who had traditionally been a milk company, but wanted to branch out into selling protein shakes. Mike realized that this company needed to start advertising to a different market, as they had only been advertising to moms concerned with organic milk, a rather niche market. So he helped create an advertising campaign selling to gym bros and tailoring their advertising to people who wanted to get jacked. Mike understood that in order to garner more attention, he needed to go against the grain of what was normally promoted to customers. But Mike was constantly in meetings with these big companies trying to convince them of doing something different and bold with their marketing strategy, but rarely would they ever listen. Most corporations want to toe the line and be incredibly safe, or in Mike's eyes, boring. This lesson in marketing would become a staple for what was to come with Liquid Death. During the summer of 2009, the idea first began. A friend of Mike's put him on the backstage list for the Warped Tour. Concerts like these were often sponsored by soda companies and energy drinks, and this one in particular was sponsored by Monster Energy. Now, it would be common to see Monster everywhere here, and artists would be drinking lots of these beverages during their performances, or so it looked like. Mike got a view from behind the scenes of these artists and knew they couldn't be drinking 4 Monsters in a couple-hour span while performing live music. So while backstage, he saw that they weren't actually drinking Monster Energy, they were drinking Monster Tour Water, which was just water in a Monster can. A popular method these kinds of companies used to get their sponsored talent to actually be looking like they were using their product. But Monster wasn't selling this canned water in retail, and at first, this kind of pissed Mike off. He felt like the brands were being deceiving. But this is what sparked the idea for Liquid Death, as he wondered why there weren't any healthy options that delivered on cooler branding, such as Monster or Red Bull. Mike realized all of the cool marketing was coming from junk food and soda companies, but a water company? Well, they weren't doing any sort of advertising like that. So in 2014, Mike was working on a public service ad campaign about the health risks of sugary energy drinks. And he proposed an idea of doing a canned water stunt that would make fun of the energy drink industry. But the client wasn't interested. So Mike kept thinking about the idea during his free time and trying to figure out more details on how he could potentially execute on it. Not for a client, but for himself. Mike said, "You kind of have to trick your brain to come up with a bad idea to truly be thinking in innovative territory. It works really well because you start thinking like, oh, what's the dumbest possible name for a super healthy, safe beverage? Liquid Death. Probably the dumbest name." So using what he had learned from past jobs at ad agencies, Mike decided he wanted to create a company with a name that was unlike any other and one that poked fun at the soda and energy drink industry. So on July 6, 2017, Mike filed the term Liquid Death for trademark. But there were two big problems. He lacked the money and he knew very little about the beverage industry as a whole. In the beginning, Mike created a 3D render of the Liquid Death can and he started looking for potential investors, but none of them thought it would work. They said it looked too much like a beer can and retailers would never want to sell something with the word death on it. Mike didn't stop though. He said he would scour LinkedIn for bottled water consultants and call them up and try to gather more info on how he could put water into cans. But they would tell him that they weren't familiar with any co-packers that could put water into cans. The co-packing situation was rather complicated. All of the co-packers used plastic for bottled water. Nowhere in the US could produce it, at least not at an affordable cost. But he did find someone over in Austria that said they could do it. So Mike flew out to meet with them and things started to actually progress. Simultaneously, during all of this, Mike had created a Facebook page for Liquid Death and spent a few $1,000s of his own money to create an ad for the product, which at the time he had none of because Liquid Death still didn't actually exist. Nonetheless, the ad became a huge hit and only 4 months later, the video had 3 million views and the Facebook page had almost 80,000 followers, which was more than Aquafina's Facebook page at the time. Today, the ad has over 5 million views on YouTube and the comment section is filled with positive comments. Not your average response to an ad. But the ad was actually funny. They swore in it, they played right into the stigma that bottled water had, and they made it so outlandish that it had a shock value to it. Like, you actually thought, wait a minute, is this real? But more on the marketing tactics in a bit. Ideas are worth $0. Everybody in the world has a great idea, but it's the people that can execute it the best that create the value. So now that Mike had a supplier and a lot of traction with the Facebook page, he felt like he could move into finding some investors for the company. The first round of funding was from friends and family. Many of these people threw in anywhere from 5, 10 to 20 grand. And this allowed Mike $150,000 to get a minimum run of product and launch directly to consumers online. The first sales were 12 packs of 500 milliliter cans for $20. And in the first month, Liquid Death sold $100,000 worth of product while only spending $2,500 on marketing. Of course, $20 was and is a lot for a 12 pack of canned water, but they were spending a lot on shipping since they were getting it all the way from Austria, and then again on shipping when it came to selling it to consumers online. So they had to charge a premium at first in order to make their money back and etch out a small profit. They first launched on their Liquid Death website and then got it onto Amazon. And they knew this method was good enough to get started, but that it wasn't going to be sustainable for the long term. Most people don't go online to buy beverages. They buy them in person at retail stores, particularly when they're thirsty. A lot of purchases are an impulse buy, but the problem of getting into retail was going to be a huge hurdle for them to face. It wasn't just the controversial name of Liquid Death. Retail is a cutthroat game. They have to go up against the biggest beverage conglomerates like Coke and Pepsi, who have much more money and much more resources. This means they can get the prime retail space and sell at lower costs because they do so much volume. And in order for a retailer to add Liquid Death, something has to get removed. There's only a finite amount of space, but velocity is the name of the game here. Velocity is basically how quickly a beverage product sells in a store, usually units per week per store, but it's a key indicator for consumer demand for that product. And despite Liquid Death's initial success online and with social media, retailers weren't really convinced. So instead of trying to get into big retailers, Mike had a better idea. Let's try to get into bars instead, he thought. Now, bars weren't necessarily convinced of Liquid Death being a success either. Bottled water wasn't necessarily a hit for bars, but Liquid Death was able to get the product into some different locations, and boom, It was a success. Liquid Death was a conversation starter. It looked different. The name was out there. And if someone had it, it made other people want to know more. Of course, bars don't make money when they give out tap water, but they will if they're selling Liquid Death. There's also an aspect to this that's sort of undervalued that makes drinking a non-alcoholic beverage in a setting like that kind of cool. So the company was beginning to take off, and Mike was continuing his attempts to get the product into retailers. In the spring of 2020, in fact, the exact same week the pandemic hit the US, Whole Foods gave Liquid Death a full national launch. They said they loved their slogan, "Death to Plastic," because aluminum cans are infinitely recyclable, and Whole Foods loves sustainability. Now, I have to mention that the full national treatment from Whole Foods was a huge deal because this meant that Liquid Death was going to be in every location in the US. And this is not typically how big retailers do things. What they'll usually do is test a product in a specific store or section of the country first. They'll basically do a trial run, see how it performs, and then from there, depending on how it does, the product might get into some more locations. So not only did this help with Liquid Death's sales, it also gave them some validation for getting into other retailers. They could also sell their product at a much lower cost. In the fall of 2020, they were able to get into the Southern California territory of 7-Eleven, and the product did well, resulting in a full national launch in 7-Eleven during the winter of 2021. In the first year, when they were exclusively on the internet, Liquid Death only did $2.8 million in revenue. Now, I say only with the context of in 2023, Liquid Death did $263 million in revenue, and this was up 100% from 2022 when they did $110 million in revenue. Liquid Death's marketing philosophy is based 100% on entertainment. They take edgy approaches to promoting their brand, and they're rather unapologetic in doing so. Mike's quoted saying, "We don't want to make marketing, we want to make people laugh." This serves as a stark contrast among their peers. Some examples are them using Tony Hawk's blood to create limited edition skateboard graphics, having an adult film star promote the drink while explaining the dangers of plastic bottles, and having Steve-O get a Liquid Death neck tattoo. I mean, I could go on, and some of the stuff I might get flagged by YouTube for if I was to show it or fully describe it, which is hilarious and bizarre all in the same breath because it's literally an ad. But nonetheless, they have taken a very unorthodox approach, and it's clearly working. One of my favorite ways they've applied this is their most recent ad, where they are giving away an actual jet. If you ever saw the Netflix documentary Pepsi, Where's My Jet? Then you'll get a kick out of this. And if you didn't see it, well, basically in the 90s, Pepsi did a similar giveaway, except when the person actually won, Pepsi was like, "Oops, we're just kidding." So the guy took him to court and sued, but he lost. So Liquid Death is clearly making fun of their competitor Pepsi by doing this, and also, of course, doing something brazen at the same time. The winner's also receiving a year-long supply of Liquid Death. In 2022, Liquid Death continued to expand its beverage offerings into other categories under the Liquid Death name. It started with flavored sparkling water, which has agave in it, so it's more of a healthy alternative to soda. And then they got into different kinds of iced teas, and most recently, they released Death Dust, which is an electrolyte drink mix. Even their drink names are hilarious, like Mango Chainsaw or Rest in Peach. But the craziest one of all was their Armless Palmer name, which was for their iced tea lemonade drink. And it wasn't long until they had an issue with that. In the fall of 2023, they released an Instagram post saying the estate of Arnold Palmer was suing them. So in order to avoid a senseless legal battle with someone who has way more money to spend, they would change the name to Dead Billionaire and to go buy the old cans while you still could. Now, without a doubt, Liquid Death is facing more competition now than ever before. The big players in the industry like Coke and Pepsi are not just going to sit by idly and watch. Gatorade, which is owned by Pepsi, released several new rehydration products, including their own bottled water this year. Monster has released their own Warped Tour canned water to retailers. I bet they wish they did that a lot sooner. And many of the other national water companies are owned by Coke or Pepsi, like Dasani, Aquafina, Smartwater, etc. These conglomerates have way more money to spend, their own supply chains, prime real estate and retailers, and many more employees. So while Liquid Death has received over $200 million from several rounds of investment funding, and many investors are notable celebrities like Tony Hawk, Martha Stewart, Josh Brolin, DeAndre Hopkins, and Live Nation, there was a report in 2023 that Liquid Death was working with Goldman Sachs on an IPO in 2024. This means the company would go public and be listed on the New York Stock Exchange, but nothing is official as of the making of this video. However, it does beg the question, how long can the joke last? As of March 2024, the company is still not profitable, which isn't necessarily a huge shortcoming for them as they're still in their early years, focused on growth and expansion. But to me, the greater question is, if they do sell out to go public, what parts of the company remain intact and what parts fall away into history? Bold and edgy advertisements are are bound to rub some people the wrong way. And when you start having to answer to shareholders on Wall Street, your priorities certainly will shift. So while Liquid Death is definitely disrupting the industry, it remains to be seen for how long.
Why not increase the price and therefore increase the profit?
We're successful.
That's Don Voltaggio, chairman, co-founder of Arizona Beverage Company, which currently does about $4 billion in sales each year, and the company all started by accident. To this day, Don's claimed he's never sent a text, never sent an email, and never even turned on a computer before. And even in spite of all of that, his net worth is estimated at $6.5 billion. But Don here isn't your average CEO billionaire. Not just for those reasons, but because he's committed to keeping prices low while not sacrificing on their drink's quality, a rare feature from a CEO these days. Because as we know, most big companies will figure out ways to cut costs any way they can. Oftentimes, though, at the expense of the very product they're selling. Doing so, they'll wind up increasing their prices to increase their profits. I mean, we've all seen it 100 times before. But how did this company start by accident, and how in the world is Arizona able to keep their famous 99-cent iced tea the same price as it was from over 30 years ago? Well, the year's 1992 in Brooklyn, New York. Don Voltaggio and friend John Farrellito are running a beverage distribution business, primarily focused on beer and soda. Their focus is on multi-brand distribution in the New York City boroughs. When one day, on a cold February morning, Don sees a Snapple truck being unloaded at one of the local retailers. He was familiar with Snapple as it was a New York-based company. He saw it come to market, saw it struggle, and then saw it succeed. But it was on this cold day when the idea first came to him. See, Snapple was becoming more and more popular at this time, but Don knew that in order for it to be selling in the freezing cold of February, the product was far more successful than he had ever thought. The misconception that iced tea would only be sold in the hot summer months was smashed right then and there. Snapple was sold in 16-ounce wide-mouth glass bottles, and Don thought to himself, if I create a similar bottle as them, why in the world would someone buy mine over theirs? But with his background in alcoholic beverages, he knew there was a malt liquor that sold in 22-ounce tallboy cans, and he thought, why not put the tea in those cans? The idea was simple. In order to compete, sell a bigger quantity of it for the same price as Snapple. But he wasn't setting out to create this huge successful brand. He simply thought, if he can add another non-alcoholic beverage product to his distribution truck and sell it to the retailers he already had relationships with, well, he can make a little bit more money. Since he'd be creating and manufacturing the product, he could get better margins on it, rather than if he was just distributing it for another iced tea company. The model was simple. Don says, make it look good, make it taste good, and price it fair. The design of the can and the taste of the tea were going to be crucial, but it all started with the value proposition, the size of the can. And for the record, everyone told Don this wouldn't work. Even the bank he went to called it a dumb idea, and he loves to bring this up to them because he still does business with the same bank today. Now, despite the name Arizona, the company has no real connection to the state. The name is said to have been inspired by the Adobe-style house that Don and his wife lived in Brooklyn. He said it looked like a house from Santa Fe, and that was actually the first name of the company. But when he put Santa Fe on a can, he said it didn't look right, so he ended up changing it to Arizona, despite never being to Arizona at the time. He said he associated Arizona with a healthy, clean, and dry feel that was different from the Brooklyn feel, and he thought those features were really important for an iced tea beverage business. As I mentioned, the design on the can was crucial, and after all, when competing with some of the biggest players in the industry, you need to find a way to stand out on the shelves. He actually had his wife design many of the initial concepts that still look the same to this day. Bright colors, cool looking imagery, and a bold Arizona logo all played into the themes. The inspiration of the cans came from many different things in their home. Her perfume bottle and pictures from one of their son's coloring books have said to inspire the notable green tea can with the bright turquoise and pink flowers, which at the time when that can was made, people told Don that the green tea wouldn't sell to men because of how colorful the can was. Don said, great, women can buy it then. Don knew it would be successful, and he didn't really care what the pundits thought. In 1996, Arizona introduced their gallon jug of iced tea, and Don says at the time, this was a radical idea. Remembering the first major retailer they proposed the product to, the buyer at the store said, that's a crazy, stupid idea, and it will never sell. So the salesman for Arizona came back to Don telling him what the retailer said, and Don responded with, that's good news, because that guy's never been right. Today, the gallon jug is one of Arizona's most successful offerings. And as the years went on and Arizona became more and more successful, Don figured out ways for the business to become more efficient. While this is the natural evolution of any successful business throughout the years, he didn't want to raise the prices on the product despite inflation continuing to rise. The first way the business was able to save was their lack of advertising. Everything was done from word of mouth. But at Arizona's core, the can was really the biggest form of advertising. When Don was asked by another businessman, "How big is your marketing team?" Don said, "It's big." And the guy responded, "How big?" And Don said, "He's 6'8", referring to the fact that it was just Don handling the marketing. Today, the same can't be said because both of Don's sons are heavily involved in the business. His son Spencer is the chief marketing officer, and his other son Wesley is the chief creative officer, but more on them in a moment. Other ways they've made the business more efficient is the ability to produce more of the product much faster. Back when the company was in its infancy, it was being produced at a brewery in Cincinnati. The facility could make 100 cans per minute, but today at the Arizona plant in New Jersey, they can make 1,600 cans per minute. And over the years, they've also been able to use less aluminum in their cans, resulting in them being 50% lighter in weight. They have set up multiple distribution centers across the US to make their deliveries more efficient. And obviously, with lighter cans, this allows for more of them to go on a pallet and ultimately into the truck. But they also focus on delivering their drinks at nighttime instead of the daytime to avoid traffic, and this speeds up their deliveries. And lastly, they've also integrated shipping their product with trains, which can help them save on shipping costs. According to Don, one boxcar from rail is equivalent to 5 truckloads with a standard truck. But over the years, despite all of this efficiency, they haven't touched the beverage at all. Don says it's because that's what people are buying. But in 2012, after a falling out between the two co-founders, John Farolito filed a lawsuit against Don. This was because John wanted to sell his half of the company to some major international beverage companies. The lawsuit ended up lasting years and went all the way up to the New York State Supreme Court's Appellate Division, where they ruled in favor of Don. Don was allowed to buy out John's half of the company, but there was ultimately a dispute over how much the company was worth. Don's lawyers pointed to the 2007 valuation of the company that put it at around $430 million, but John's lawyers argued that the company was now worth $6 billion. And in the end, Don ended up paying $1 billion to buy out John's half interest in the company. But as the years have continued, Arizona has increasingly faced competition in the beverage space. I mean, back in the 90s when the company was first founded, there were no energy drinks, no health-conscious drinks, and certainly not as much consolidation as there is today. Arizona has had to constantly learn to navigate this ever-changing landscape, and they've broadened their offerings significantly over the years. Initially starting with only 2 flavors of tea, where today they have over 500 different items, expanding into sparkling water, energy drinks, juice, coffee, alcoholic iced teas, and even a few food items like fruit snacks, popsicles, and snack trays. His 2 sons, Spencer and Wesley, are heavily involved in the business today. They have a 2-hour board meeting every single day with Don and another executive at the company, where they'll have lunch and talk about all things Arizona, taste testing new products, discussing potential ideas, and much more. And while I had mentioned Don previously handled all of the marketing and advertising in the past, which didn't consist of much except building a great product, today his 2 sons are in charge of leading the brand's future. They've built out the company's website and social channels and have ventured into merch, including collaborating with several other notable brands like Adidas and creating their own product lines of clothing, hats, skateboards, and so much more, pushing the brand forward and finding other ways to build out the company's revenue streams, which certainly has to play a factor in Arizona being able to maintain that 99-cent can to this day. But I have to make a clarification here regarding the 99-cent cans. Not every can has the 99-cent Great Buy logo on it, and not every retailer respects Arizona's suggestion of pricing. Ultimately, every retailer has the autonomy when it comes to what they're going to charge for the tea. So that's why in some areas, or in some cases, you will see the tea cost more. But according to this research compiled by MarketWatch, if Arizona Tea were to keep up with the market costs and raise prices accordingly since their release all the way back in 1992, the 22-ounce can would cost 124% more, equating to $2.22. Arizona has built a reputation of being essentially anti-capitalistic. They are a private company, which allows for them to do things how they want. They're debt-free, and according to this USA Today interview with Don, it appears he takes great pride in giving back to his employees. He seems to really care about trying to maintain Arizona's low price points and keeping his employees happy. The story of Arizona is a refreshing one. A family-owned business that hasn't sold out to a big corporation and who has doubled down on the very things it was founded on: hard work, consistency, fair pricing, and a good deal. Now, obviously, not every company cares to operate like this, but if you want to learn about this salad chain that's trying to reinvent fast food, well, I covered it all in this video here. Check it out next.
You know, we have a health crisis in America, and so much of it is just directly tied to food. This is like, how come no one's done this? You know, it's like every day we're like, how come no one's done this?
When most of us hear the term fast food, we don't typically associate it with healthy food. We think of this and this. But Sweetgreen is trying to change that. Sweetgreen is the popular fast casual salad chain trying to be the McDonald's of our generation, but it's only kinda working out because the average price of a salad from Sweetgreen is anywhere between $13 and $16, which is no doubt expensive, but it hasn't seemed to stop them. At least not yet. The company is currently valued at $3.3 billion and has roughly 230 locations across the US. Not bad for the 3 college students that started it 17 years ago with 0 restaurant experience. But today, the company is still losing millions of dollars a month. So the main question is, why aren't $15 salads a profitable business? And how long can this company survive without being profitable, all while taking on some of the biggest fast food giants in the world? This is the story of Sweetgreen. It turns out selling salads made from local fresh ingredients at scale is a very complex and expensive business model. But that's what these 3 college students had in mind when they graduated from Georgetown University in 2007. Jonathan Neiman, Nicholas Jamay, and Nathaniel Rue noticed a problem with food around campus when they were in college together. They said all the food you could get fast wasn't healthy, and all of the healthy food wasn't affordable or fast. So they saw an opportunity for a fast, casual restaurant that served healthy food where quality wasn't going to be sacrificed for convenience. It initially began to fulfill their own eating habits and then moved into feeding their friends and their community. But as the company grew, they actually realized this opportunity for Sweetgreen was much bigger than just a single restaurant in the Metro DC area. Back in 2007, when the 3 founders were first coming up with the idea, they actually knew nothing about running a restaurant. In fact, none of them even had a background in food and beverage. They often cite their naivete as a big reason as to why this endeavor worked, which I know sounds rather counterintuitive, but the story is pretty interesting. Before the first location was ever built, they didn't have any real business plan and they didn't have the money to begin a restaurant. Their initial goals were to literally just break even so that they could have a place to eat and serve their friends at college. Jonathan talks about them going to their local Chipotle with a clicker and counting how many customers came in. They were trying to figure out the math of how many customers Sweetgreen would need just to keep afloat and to stay open. When they first tried to figure out the initial idea, they thought they could build the restaurant and get it open for about $100 grand. But once they hired an architect and a general contractor, those 2 came back to the founders with a budget of over $300,000, and they all thought to themselves, oh man, we can't do this. But they pressed on, creating a 4-page business plan and started to seek out potential investors. Jonathan says they scheduled hundreds of meetings, mostly with friends and family and even college professors. They went to anyone and everyone who would listen. And even with hundreds of people declining to invest, they wound up with about 50 people saying yes, giving them on average $5,000 each, resulting in a total of $300,000 to begin their dream. They had a 560 square foot shack and had to completely renovate the space to make it suitable for a restaurant. It had no plumbing or electricity, and they say their ADA compliant bathroom was actually bigger than their kitchen space. But this renovation resulted in them going completely over budget on their very first location. And Sweetgreen's experience with cost overruns at their first location was the indicative beginning of a pattern that would continue to impact their profitability. However, when the doors first opened, the store was pretty successful. They had seemed to really fill a need in the DC area. They had the advantage of knowing a lot of people from college, which in a way helped them market their product to students and people in the community. But when the winter came that year, things really slowed down. The restaurant was so small that they didn't have any seating in it, and most people were not going to walk around with a cold salad on a freezing cold day. So they thought to themselves, maybe they should try to open another location. And as the 3 founders were trying to figure out the business in the first few years, they realized that this whole restaurant thing was pretty complex. Now, I know some of you are thinking, how complicated is it to really just sell salads? Well, one of the ways Sweetgreen has tried to stand out from competitors is they didn't want to use the traditional food distributors when it came to their product. The whole purpose of this was to serve high quality food from local or organic farmers. And restaurants typically use national food distributors, especially restaurants that scale. They do so that they can source many different ingredients at lower costs. But distributors will also handle the shipping and logistics for these food items, essentially creating a supply chain for them. Sweetgreen instead decided to work directly with farmers, which has made them create and heavily rely on their own supply chain. Building this out has and will continue to be a cost driver for them, and something that is not always going to be so straightforward. But another important thing that the 3 founders learned early on was that bigger restaurant chains typically used commissaries or centralized kitchens to prep and cook most of their ingredients. That kitchen then ships the cooked or prepared food to the restaurants, and they can reheat the food for service. The restaurants do this because it removes a lot of complexities and lowers the cost for their business. But the founders thought that this is what makes a lot of restaurants suck and can take away from the quality of the food itself. Chipotle, for example, has a restaurant level profit margin of 27.5%, and McDonald's has an operating profit margin over 45%. While there are a ton of differences between these two businesses, it does shed some light on how the difference in food prep can affect profit margins. So early on, Sweetgreen decided that all of their food would be prepared fresh daily in their stores. And this is another aspect of their business model that increases their costs. But they believe that this will help them stand out amongst some of their peers in the fast food market. And so far, it's proven to be true. Sweetgreen also decided very early on that they did not want to franchise their brand. However tempting it was to expand rapidly, was ultimately outweighed by the lack of control and quality they felt would inevitably occur if they weren't in charge of every restaurant. They are, for the most part, taking the Starbucks and Chipotle route. With a few exceptions, Starbucks and Chipotle own and operate the majority of their locations, which is very different from the franchise model most fast food companies like McDonald's, Burger King, etc. all use. In 2009, during the height of the great financial crisis, they decided to open 2 more locations. Now, when they opened those other 2 locations, one was in Maryland and the other was also in the DC area. They both were about 3 times the size of the original restaurant and allowed for seating and larger kitchens. But when the second location in DC opened, it was empty. Like, no one showed up, and the founders started to panic because once again, they had taken on debt to expand and open these stores. There were a few problems with this store specifically. They said it was on the wrong side of the street, and it was during a time when the economy wasn't doing well. But probably most importantly, they hadn't marketed their restaurant at all. See, the first location had the benefits of word of mouth. They were close to the college, and having all 3 founders be former students at Georgetown, it allowed for more opportunities for this business. This other location didn't have that. Nobody knew who these guys were. So their first idea to market was to give out samples and play music outside. The one good thing about this location was that in the back, there was a parking lot that hosted farmers markets every weekend. And this would prove to be a great opportunity to showcase their salads with samples, and it actually started to work. But as the crowds got bigger, they started to turn into block parties. And the founders thought, what if we actually host our own concert? Originally, the idea started out small, but the more they learned about the business of concerts and festivals, the more they understood the economies of scale aspect to them. They realized that with all of the fixed costs related to a concert, it actually made more sense to make it bigger. So instead of a venue that could host 3,000 people, they went for one that could host 15,000. And they ended up getting a bunch of notable artists such as Kendrick Lamar, The Weeknd, Lana Del Rey, The Strokes, and so many more. They called it the Sweet Life Festival. It ended up turning into the biggest music festival in the Mid-Atlantic. Now, most of the time they said they would break even on this event, but they viewed it as a unique and cool way to market their product and build a community. They ended up running it for several years until 2017, and the CEO has mentioned they want to bring it back at some point, but they want to take time to find the proper approach for it. I'm assuming it was a lot of work and a lot of money for not so great of a return on marketing spend, especially as the business grew and they started to get more serious about becoming a profitable company. I'm sure the priorities sort of shifted. During those years, Sweetgreen wasn't just focused on throwing festivals though. They were also carefully trying to expand their footprint, particularly on the East Coast. They first moved to Philadelphia and then into Boston and New York, and this was no easy thing for them, as part of the problems they faced had to do with the costs related to expanding, but also fleshing out their own supply chains for those regions. They couldn't necessarily rely on the same supply chain and suppliers that they had going for them in the DC region. And despite competition from other fast casual chains, including salad ones, Sweetgreen was able to find success in several different markets throughout the US. One of the distinctions this company has made over the years, besides their food, is their investments into technology. In fact, for years, Sweetgreen has sort of been branding themselves as a tech company. Their CEO even once said that they want to be the Spotify of food by leveraging data to deliver personalized salads from their app. And they were actually early adopters of developing an app all the way back in 2013 and seeing the potential of ordering food from our smartphones. An interesting fact about their name Sweetgreen is that when they first began, the founders were just going to name the company Greens. But once they learned about trademark law, they realized they needed something more unique. And in addition to selling salads, they were also selling frozen yogurt at the time, which is where the name Sweetgreen came from. The stores today don't serve any frozen yogurt, but the name is stuck. During the mid-2000s, Sweetgreen was becoming known for for having long lines during lunch hours, and no matter what they did, they could only go so fast. But one huge problem for restaurants when it comes to mobile ordering is being able to fulfill more orders. Sweetgreen knew that in order to be able to withstand their normal foot traffic as well as mobile ordering, they needed to start retrofitting their existing stores and planning to build a second line for assembling mobile orders. So they ended up replacing the kitchen area that was used for frozen yogurt and turned it into a kitchen line exclusively for mobile app ordering. There's no doubt they were ahead of the game on this, because as of today, mobile ordering equates to over 60% of their sales. By 2019, Sweetgreen had raised over $350 million in venture capital funding, achieving a valuation of over $1 billion, making it one of the hottest names in the fast casual dining sector. Investors were excited about Sweetgreen's potential to disrupt the traditional fast food market with its healthier alternatives. 2 years later, in November of 21, at the height of the stock market, Sweetgreen went public on the New York Stock Exchange. The company needed capital to continue their expansion, but anytime a company goes public, so do their financials. And investors saw rather quickly the company was losing millions every quarter. Their first quarter, when they reported earnings, it showed they had revenue of $102 million, but their net loss was $49 million. And this was almost $20 million more than the prior year period. While individual Sweetgreen locations are profitable, the company itself has struggled with high overhead costs. Later in 2021, they acquired Spice Kitchen, which was a robotics company, for over $50 million, created by a group of students from MIT. They purchased this company so they could own and implement their automation into their stores. Today, this is what Sweetgreen is calling their Infinite Kitchen, where their salad-making robot assembles bowls at a rapid rate, and according to Sweetgreen, with perfect accuracy and precision. Infinite Kitchens can make up to 500 bowls an hour, which is significantly faster than a store with human preparation. This isn't some it'll be cool if it works out sort of thing for them. Currently, there are only 2 locations with Infinite Kitchens built in, but they were able to increase restaurant profit margins to 28%, which is 10% more than the average store. Now, these Infinite Kitchens only assemble the bowls. Sweetgreen still needs labor to prep all of their ingredients and serve a few other items that the robots can't. But as you can imagine, it can certainly help them save on labor and slippage. As of their last earnings call, Sweetgreen is looking to expand 4 to 8 more Infinite Kitchens per year by retrofitting older store locations. And they say they're actually not going to replace any staff members in stores where they retrofit. Now, we have yet to see how this tech can hold up in some of their busiest locations like in Manhattan or Boston, but more will certainly be revealed. In April of last year, Sweetgreen announced an addition to their loyalty program, Sweetgreen Plus, a first-of-a-kind monthly subscription for a restaurant, $10 a month, or $3 off 1 salad per day, and free delivery after 4 p.m. Their goal with this was to incentivize customers to eat at the restaurants in non-peak hours, more specifically during dinner time. Despite this addition, a year later, they still have not seen the results that they bet on last April. Their CEO said, "I think what we have done is built a lot of good technology capabilities to enable a great loyalty program, but we have not yet seen the benefit of that program. In order for Sweetgreen to make it, they need to convince their customers to come for dinner too, as lunch has predominantly been their busiest times. Convincing Americans to eat a salad for dinner might prove to be more difficult than it sounds, but Sweetgreen has also tried to lure new customers by offering something called protein plates, which launched in October of 2023 and is an alternative meal to their salads. They launched with the slogan, "You don't have to be a salad person to be a Sweetgreen person." Sweetgreen says that sales exceeded expectations, and as of recently, in May of 2024, they introduced their caramelized garlic steak, and on the day it was announced, the stock price went up 37%. I would expect Sweetgreen to continue to evolve their menu offerings to try to get more customers over time, but this isn't a guaranteed recipe for success though. More offerings create more complexity for staff and more room for error, but can also create more confusion among consumers when it comes to the brand's identity. This is the price of a Big Mac meal at McDonald's. And this is the price of a Harvest Bowl salad from Sweetgreen. So the question is paying a few more dollars for something that isn't processed food worth it? So far, Sweetgreen customers say yes. While McDonald's reported slower traffic last quarter, Sweetgreen didn't. And their CEO says that it's because they haven't taken the same kinds of price increases that a lot of fast food restaurants have. And that Sweetgreen's value proposition is stronger now than it ever was before. The more that fast food prices rise, the more that fast casual places like Sweetgreen start to look a little bit more appealing for some consumers. In the first quarter of 2024, 2024, Sweetgreen reported net losses of nearly $27 million, which was an improvement from the same time a year ago when they posted a loss of $33.7 million. Today, the average Sweetgreen does about $2.9 million in sales. And year to date, their stock is up nearly as much as Nvidia, over 170%. So while Sweetgreen is continuing to push the boundaries of what modern fast casual restaurants look like, from things like their menu offerings, their tech innovations, and their loyalty programs, Jonathan Neiman believes that expansion of restaurant locations and incorporating more of their infinite kitchens is the way to attaining profitability with the company. He also believes that Sweetgreen can eventually expand to 5,000 stores in just the US alone. Certainly a lofty goal from their current 230 locations. But what do you all think? Will Sweetgreen be the next Chipotle and continue to redefine fast food? Or will this be another bankrupt company that we talk about in the next decade? In a lot of ways, In-N-Out is the antithesis to the fast food industry. In-N-Out is not concerned with the rise of artificial intelligence, the increase in mobile app ordering, cashing in on an IPO, or even expanding across the country. With over 400 locations spread across 8 states and plans to expand into 3 more, In-N-Out has taken a conservative approach to growing their business. But to me, it's not so much about what they're not doing, it's about their unapologetic way of doubling down on what's worked for decades, leaning heavily into the things they were doing over 70 years ago, and even as times have changed, In-N-Out has largely remained the same, like keeping their menu simple, focusing on fresh ingredients with low prices, along with their commitment to upholding a high standard in serving their guests, and of course, taking good care of their employees. So what's allowed In-N-Out to make more money than ever before, all while avoiding the path that nearly every competitor of theirs has taken? In this video, I'll break down the surprising and somewhat counterintuitive approach In-N-Out uses to operate, and I'll also get into some of the untold stories that have helped make it into this successful and unique business. In-N-Out has been around for over 75 years, and it all began with newlywed couple Harry and Esther Snyder. Harry had recently finished serving in World War II. The economy was doing well, and this was also the same time that cars were becoming more and more popular in the United States. Harry had a vision for a fast restaurant that served fresh quality food. While he was in Olympia, Washington, he witnessed a restaurant where cars would drive right up to a window, order, and then receive their food. Never having to shut off or get out of their car, Harry believed he could use a similar concept where customers could go in and out quickly. He knew he had to take this concept to a more popular section of the West Coast, so he and Esther packed up and moved to Los Angeles, California. When Harry and Esther were planning to start this business, they sought some guidance from another man involved in the restaurant industry, Carl Karcher, the man who started Carl's Jr. His advice was pretty simple. He said, always focus on the product and the personal touch and never give up. And while this advice was rather generic, the Snyders took it to heart, keeping it simple, doing one thing and doing it well, which is why the menu still to this day only has a handful of offerings. Harry was said to be extremely determined and was a problem solver, but he needed an investor for his endeavor. Enter Charlie Naughton. At 52, Charlie was looking for an investment to fund his retirement. Harry told Charlie about this idea, and they decided to combine their money, and they came up with $5,000. They sketched out a 10x10 burger shack and began construction. But having only $1,000 left, they still needed equipment and inventory to purchase. Harry believed the quality of the food would be the most important part of this equation, so he was able to find some used restaurant equipment, such as a grill, a fryer, and a refrigerator, and they began. The sign they built had big white letters on a red background that read, In-N-Out Hamburgers, no delay. And on October 22nd, 1948, 20 miles north of downtown LA, in a section called Baldwin Park, the first In-N-Out officially opened. It served 3 things: hamburgers, fries, and drinks. By the end of the month, they had sold over 2,000 burgers. These days, the average In-N-Out will easily sell that many in just one day. Now, one of the main pillars of Harry's vision was transparency. So when he built the restaurant, the front of the building had these large glass windows so that when customers would drive up, they could see everything in the restaurant, including their food being prepared. Now, this idea today is mostly referred to as an open kitchen concept, but at the time it was pretty innovative. Now, in the same year of 1948, Harry would go on to develop something that would not only shape the restaurant into what it is today, but it would also change how the quick service industry would operate even to this day. As I mentioned, Harry was an Army veteran before this endeavor, so when he was on Army ships, he would see an intercom system, and this gave him the idea that he could build a two-way speaker for his restaurant so that guests wouldn't have to get out of their car and so that cooks wouldn't have to yell through the window to the guests in their car. He wanted to figure out a way to streamline the drive-through concept. So Harry ended up creating the first two-way speaker for his restaurant. And at the time, this was really cutting edge. And in order to get customers to understand how to use it, he had to make a sign and put it on the speaker that said in red letters, two-way speaker for your convenience. Driver may order from your car. Interestingly, he never ended up filing a patent for this technology. And as we know today, it's been adopted into nearly nearly every fast food restaurant in the world. For those first 15 years, Harry and Esther would hand mash each burger to maintain their quality perfection. Now, it was really common for them to pull over 80-hour work weeks. Esther would usually manage the books, and Harry would do everything restaurant related, getting up very early, sourcing the ingredients from local grocers and butchers, and then going into the restaurant, cooking, managing, etc. It wasn't until 1963 that Harry hired an in-house butcher and a patty making machine, and this is very similar to the way In-N-Out operates today. In 1976, when Harry Snyder passed away, In-N-Out had 18 locations, at which point the company was handed over to his son Rich. At just 24 years old, Rich worked with his brother Guy to establish a commissary at the company's Baldwin Park headquarters. Now, ensuring total quality control over In-N-Out's ingredients was crucial, but also they wanted to reinforce the service aspect of the family's business philosophy. So they created In-N-Out University. Also located near the company's headquarters, this introduced consistent training for new managers and today continues to reinforce the values that are so integral to In-N-Out's success. Rich ran In-N-Out for the following 26 years and expanded the company from 18 locations to 93. Most locations were in California, but they also had expanded to Nevada as well. But in 1993, Rich would tragically pass away in a plane crash in Orange County, California. After Rich's passing, the company fell into their other son's ownership, Guy. Guy had expanded the company from 93 locations to 140 and also expanded In-N-Out to Arizona. However, only 6 years later, Guy would tragically pass away from a drug overdose, leaving the Snyder family devastated. The company would then go back into the hands of Esther until she would pass away in 2006. And for the first time, the company would land into somebody outside of the Snyder family, Mark Taylor. Mark had worked with In-N-Out for several years and had worked in higher management, but there still was one family member remaining, and it was Guy's daughter, Lindsay. But Lindsay hadn't really been a part of the business. In fact, she was pretty much sheltered from it for most of her life. But when she turned 30, she received a 50% stake in In-N-Out Burger, and that's when she decided to continue her family's legacy and get involved in the business. But instead of just walking in and becoming the boss just because she was the granddaughter of the founder, she decided to do things a little bit more organically. She applied to an In-N-Out location in Redding, California, and worked her way up the chain. She said she wanted to do this the right way and not receive any special treatment for being in the family. This not only speaks to her character, but honestly, it's due to how In-N-Out has historically treated their employees. But more on that in a moment. At 27, Lindsay would step into the role of president of the company, and she still runs In-N-Out to this day. In-N-Out has a very positive track record when it comes to working for them. They pay above the industry norms, they promote from within, and this is mostly because they're not a public company. I believe they put a much greater emphasis on hiring and retaining employees because of this. All employees receive healthcare benefits, 401k plans, paid vacations, and holidays, along with bonuses for outperforming locations. Restaurant managers can make well over 6 figures at In-N-Out, with the average salary being over $160,000. All of this can be achieved without a college degree. Another interesting fact about this is that when you begin as an associate at In-N-Out, they will never just begin you on the grill. The grill is viewed as one of the higher end jobs, and associates have to work their way up to that tier. This speaks to their commitment and focus on maintaining high standards for the food that they serve. The menu at In-N-Out is incredibly simple: cheeseburger, hamburger, double, fries, shakes, sodas, and a few other drink offerings. In-N-Out doesn't do limited time offerings. They don't do collaborations with movies. There are no toys and kids meals. Their advertising and marketing is very, very limited. There occasionally will be a radio or a TV ad, but by and far, their primary strategy is word of mouth. I'm always fascinated by the few select companies who don't use the traditional means and large budgets to advertise their products to the masses. I mean, there are so many companies out there these days who spend billions a year to get eyes on whatever it is they're selling. But In-N-Out is just not one of those companies. And it's clearly working for them. One of the interesting ways this word of mouth advertising has worked over the years is In-N-Out's secret menu, or their not so secret menu, depending on who's asking. Even from its early years, Harry Snyder never wanted to take on any debt to expand. He wanted to expand, but he never wanted to owe anyone. This would even manifest when it came to paying his suppliers. As soon as a bill would come in, he would pay them right then and there. Not using any debt to expand is a similar approach that Chick-fil-A has utilized. And while it may seem counterintuitive to a successful fast food business, it's actually one of the very things that can keep the business contained to be thorough and intentional with its expansion. The company's early philosophy of gradual growth has remained today. Because of a rigorous commitment to quality and freshness, the company only builds stores that are located within a close proximity to their 3 in-house patty making facilities. This ensures it will never take more than a single day's drive to their own trucks to deliver the fresh ingredients to each restaurant. And that's why we haven't seen any In-N-Out locations on the East Coast. Although recently they have begun development in Tennessee. Tennessee, and that's because one of their patty making facilities is in Texas. Now, making sure it hasn't skimped on what's made it successful in the first place at the expense of growth is a really interesting concept. See, if In-N-Out had turned into a public company at any point in its history, there's no doubt in my mind it would not even be close to the restaurant it used to be, or even use the principles that it was founded on. I'd be describing a very different restaurant, because board members and shareholders would be drunk on the idea of global expansion, franchising locations, licensing out their name, cutting corners on fresh ingredients, and most of all, cutting costs on labor, which would certainly lead to a decline in service and consistency. The story of In-N-Out should serve as an important lesson in business. They have basically obsessed about the customer experience while doing one thing and doing it well. This idea of infinite growth is what makes a lot of companies lose their core principles along the way. It's the perpetual pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and In-N-Out could care less about all of that. I mean, they don't even want to use DoorDash or Uber Eats or create an app of their own to allow for mobile ordering because they believe it will take away from the guest experience in the store. Of course, they're still a business and they want to make money, but they genuinely want to serve their food the best possible way and do whatever they can to make their customers happy. Now, if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing. And if you're interested about the real reason why Red Lobster went bankrupt, well, I covered it all in this video here. Please check it out next.